Hello, good evening, and welcome to the Climate Show. We've got episode 17 for you this week, and we'll be talking about a very special, or perhaps not so special, British peer.
Yes, and we're not going to mention his name.
Brighton peer.
Yeah, not until later on in the show, because I don't want to mention his name right now. But John Cook is going to do a good piece on this, and John Cook is back. It's good to have him. Plus solutions as well. Yes, we've got heaps of electric stuff in there, plus burn your prunings. It's all coming up on this edition of The Climate Show. This episode of The Climate Show is brought to you by Celsius.co.nz, HotTopic.co.nz, SkepticalScience.com, Scoop.co.nz, and Kiwi FM.
What good is a drop in the ocean? What good is a drop in the ocean?
G'day and hello and welcome along to The Climate Show, episode number 17, the show all about climate politics, news, science, and even the solutions as well. My name is Glenn Williams, broadcasting from this, what can I call this? I was going to call it the Kiwi Studio, but it's not really. We'll call it the B Studio, the temporary studio, though. It's not B, really. I mean, it's quite plush around here and everything. But anyway, I digress even before we get into the show. Gareth Ronalden is my co-host over at hot-topic.co.nz, joining us in North Canterbury, Waipara. Hi. Hello, Gareth.
Hi, how are you, Glenn?
Good. Nice and warm here in the studio as opposed to outside. Very chilly. We're certainly in the deep, dark depths of winter, but not as probably as cold as you are down south.
Actually, I don't know, because I can tell you that at the moment the external temperature is 7 degrees Celsius. Now, yesterday and overnight, Sunday night, it hovered around about -1, and it snowed a lot. We had one of the best snowfalls I've seen since in the 15 years I've been living here, with snowdrifts on the roof and the little hedges in the garden sort of buried under snow. It was quite good. And our little puppy had a whale of a time jumping around in the snow. So it was the first time she'd seen it. So
Well, the thing
very
is-
exciting. But today being Canterbury, the nor'wester
Yeah.
came along, and temperature rose and an awful lot of the snow melted, and it prompted me to have an atmospheric science thought. So here's the atmospheric science thought for the day.
Yeah.
And that is that the wind in the equivalent to the nor'wester that they have in North America and Canada, is called the Chinook, and it comes down off the Rockies and the Great Western Coastal Ranges and comes down over the plains on the eastern side, and it's called the Snow Eater, because when the Chinook blows, the snow goes, and that's what the nor'wester's been doing today. It's been a snow eater.
Which is no good for the skiers, of course. They're all celebrating that all that snow's arrived, and then half of it ends up melting when that firn wind comes through straight after.
I have to say that it was a difficult thing to resist the urge to throw the skis into the back of the car this morning, because today would have been an absolutely fantastic day at almost any ski resort in New Zealand. So,
Well, thankfully you
but
didn't.
unfortunately, I had to resist.
Because you had to be here for the show. It's the last recording that we can get out of you, Gareth, before you head away for, was it a couple of months you're on the road?
Yes, it is. I shall be overseas for around about 8 weeks. I get back at the end of September, leaving next week. So yes, it's going to be an adventure for myself and my partner. That'll be a lot of fun, I hope.
Yeah.
I hope no volcanoes interrupt our travels. I'll see what I can do in terms of dropping little items in for the show while I'm away.
Yeah.
Who knows? I may find some time between hiking in the Dolomites and cycling in France and visiting scientists in Bologna. But unfortunately, there'll be mushroom scientists, not atmospheric physicists. But never mind.
Well, as long as there might be a Wi-Fi connection along the road somewhere anyway, but we'll cross that when we come to it over the next couple of months. Yep.
Sorry, carry on.
I was going to say, before we get into the show, just a bit of housekeeping, of course. If you get interested in anything that we end up talking about on the show, you can find everything, all the links in the show notes up at theclimateshow.com and hot-topic.co.nz. It's also available in 2 flavours, audio and video. There's a YouTube clip that's embedded on those pages. Feel free to share that around, or check out the audio on Stitcher.com and the apps there, or iTunes, or just download into your favourite RSS feeder. Into the news with the cold snap that you guys have just had, or we've had.
Yeah, absolutely, and it was interesting because it was a fairly major chunk of cold air that blew up from Antarctica, and it was actually the first really decent cold snap of the winter here in New Zealand. We've actually had, I've mentioned this on the show, I know, quite mild weather. May was a record warm May. June was the fourth warmest in the record, and it's taken through till, getting towards the end of July before the really cold snap has come along. But it didn't last long. I mean, it spread all the way up the country. It was pretty cold in Auckland too, wasn't it, Glenn? Yeah,
it got down to about 3 degrees last night. That's pretty cold for Auckland. It snowed on the Waitakere Ranges, which is these ranges out near the coast, near some beautiful beaches, and apparently they haven't seen snow on those hills since the 70s or perhaps the 60s, a long, long time ago. My dad used to tell me about it. I remember it snowed. I was going, that's impossible. Can't snow up here. But yeah, maybe sleety sort of stuff, but nothing that actually settles. But very, very cold. Yeah. And so what they're saying, the harshest since 1995.
I haven't really sort of focused on those numbers. I just know that there was a very big parcel of cold Antarctic air that came up on a fairly short route to reach New Zealand. Was quite vigorous and headed north and dropped snow over most of the country, certainly over the east coasts. But as you say, it made its way up the west coast as well and got up as far as Auckland. Yeah. They don't often do that. It's usually the South Island and the east coast of the North Island that gets the cold snaps, because they kind of blow up the east coast. But so it was an interesting thing in and of itself. But the big news, the big sort of news of the last week really has been the heat wave on the US East Coast. But before we do that, I shall remember what it was I wanted to get to, which was
wasn't it?
So it was this. Yes, it was the ice island. Now, a year or so ago, a very large chunk of the Petermann Glacier, which is on the far north of Greenland, broke off and started floating south down the channel between Greenland and Baffin Island, and it's now out in the middle of Baffin Bay. Yeah. And the NASA satellite managed to capture a picture of this ice island. So when it broke off, it was 4 times the size of Manhattan. Now it's still, when you look down from space, it's still, a good, what is that, 20k long?
I thought you were going to say
55 square kilometers in size.
I honestly thought you were going to say that was all that was left of Antarctica. Just this tiny piece of floating ice. Something you put in your drink, just in the middle of the ocean there, all lonely like.
Well, if that's going into your drink, you can spare some for me, because that's absolutely massive. Yeah. But it's an interesting event in and of itself, and it's currently hanging about off the northeast coast of Canada, Labrador, as it says on the picture, and will slowly find its way out, possibly into the North Atlantic, and it's still big enough to be a fairly massive danger to shipping, although much less so than it would have been in the days of the Titanic, because we can track them from space. And in fact, the Canadians have put a tracking beacon on top of it, and there's a website where you can actually follow its course. So I just thought I'd do that, because it was a year ago, the breaking off of the Petermann Ice Island was a fairly major event in Greenland terms, and it was something we discussed with Jason Box when he was on the show a few months ago. Yeah. And regular listeners and viewers will know that Jason was very keen to get back up to the Petermann Glacier to see if the cameras that he installed there as part of the Extreme Ice Survey actually managed to capture the break-off event. And it'll be my understanding is that he should be getting back there fairly soon, and I'm really looking forward to seeing if the EIS cameras did manage to catch hold of the breakup event, because it'll be fairly spectacular. This is a really big piece of ice.
Well,
Meanwhile, this is a warm summer in Greenland.
Yeah, but if it heads anywhere near the east coast of North America, then it's going to melt up pretty quick with that heat wave they've just had over there.
Well, that's right. But before we go and talk about the heat wave, because I've screwed up the intro to that once, so I'll screw it up again. The thing is, it's actually still very, very warm up in that part of Greenland. And there are still large parts of the Petermann Glacier tongue which could break off. If you look at the satellite pictures, you can see there's cracks in this thing. And so over the next month or so, it'll be interesting to see whether anything further happens. But now at last we can talk about the heat wave on the east coast. Quite remarkable numbers coming from that. It was possibly, Jeff Masters estimated, it was only a 1 in 7 year event, the severity of the heat. But what made it absolutely astounding was that the humidity associated with it was some of the most extreme ever seen in the US. And it was approaching what they call heat index levels that are usually only found around the Red Sea in the Middle East, where the seawater gets very hot and you've got very hot land around it. And so you get this very, very moist kind of heat that actually makes it difficult for people to cool down, because human beings cool down by sweating. And I have to say, Glenn, that every time I visit Auckland, it feels sweaty after Christchurch, because Auckland has a much more humid environment than, say, Canterbury or Christchurch. We have much drier air generally than you do.
Yep, absolutely. You feel it immediately as soon as you get off the plane. Let's look at this graphic now on the Washington Post. It's called a heat. The graphic's called a heat dome, but it shows the heat wave sort of into the east of North America there, but also on either side it's sort of squashed by cooler zones. And then as we look north up past Canada, it's also very warm as well up there towards the Arctic.
Absolutely. And there's a similar image for Antarctica, which shows that although there was a cold patch to the south of New Zealand, there was actually, in Antarctic terms, an extreme heat wave on the eastern edge of the Ross Ice Shelf. But anyway, one interesting thing about that picture, Glenn, is that it's almost the reverse of what happened last winter. Where the big blue blob over Hudson Bay and northeast Canada is at the moment in July, was where there was a great big warm spot all winter, more or less, whilst the US had a cold winter. And so the positions of the sort of hot and cold anomalies have been reversed in the course of 6 months. Very interesting. But what's contributed the moisture to the extreme heat indexes that they've been seeing in the US has been the fact that they've had these huge floods. And the Mississippi flooding has wet a huge area in the sort of center of the US. And so along come the hot temperatures, the water kind of evaporates into that hot air, and then it spreads. And it's been... Through to July the 19th, there were 22 heat-related deaths in the United States. Reuters reported as many as 34 deaths. And heat is already the #1 weather killer in the USA, and this will have added to it.
So, in saying that, so would that have been predictable after those floods? Would weather people have gone, well, that is eventually during our summer, it eventually has to evaporate, so we could predict these humid events?
I would guess that they would have said that if a heat wave came along, they would expect the humidity to get high. I think a lot of the people were very surprised at how intense those humidities got. The dew points were kind of at record levels, and the sort of things you just don't see, generally speaking, in a US summer.
Yeah.
So a quite remarkable extreme event. And does it have anything to do with global warming? Well, every extreme weather event has something to do with global warming, as you will remember from our conversation with Kevin Drenberth a few shows ago. All of these events are taking place off a climate base which has already changed, and so there's generally more heat in the system. There's more moisture in the atmosphere to power the weather systems, and that's helping to create these extremes. So you can't say that global warming caused the heat wave. The heat wave was actually caused by a sequence of weather events, but the extreme nature of the heat wave certainly owes a large part of its extremeness, as it were, to the warming that's taken place in recent decades.
Okay, well, let's head over to Europe now, where alpine glaciers are retreating and pushing Europe closer to a water crisis.
Yes, absolutely. And this is something that people have been very worried about for the Himalayas, for instance, because the glaciers that exist in the mountains provide the summer flow of water for major rivers, and it's true for India, China, and so on. It's also, and Southeast Asia. It's also true for Europe. And there is a lot of ice up in the Alps, and in summer it melts. And at the moment, all of the snow and ice in the European Alps is losing mass year on year. And what this is doing is it's contributing to quite good summer flows of water. So the amount of water that's coming down in summer is better than it might have been because of the warming, because the water is just melting off the glaciers as the glaciers get shorter. So, for instance, the Rhone Glacier in central Switzerland has lost 1,266 meters of its original length in the last 140 years. So 1.26 kilometers it's retreated. And in Switzerland, they reckon that nearly 60 billion cubic meters of water are stored in the glaciers there. And of course, there are many more glaciers in France and Austria and so on. And so what this new study has looked at it, and what they're saying is that at the moment, the good summer flows are related to the runoffs coming from these declining glaciers, and that as the century progresses, the runoff from the glaciers will actually increase, but then it'll get beyond a point because the glaciers will be getting small and it will start to decline quite rapidly towards the end. So what one of the authors says is, because of the warming climate, snowmelt will happen about a month earlier and rainfall will decrease to 10 to 15% in summer.
Right.
And so the rivers runoff regimes will change. And that could have quite sort of significant impacts on the communities that live on the banks of the great rivers of Europe, because low river flows in hot summers, when you most need them, could be difficult. It's probably, in terms of global impacts, it's not as dramatic, perhaps, or the impact may not be as great as it will be for the Himalaya. But it's a region where we have a lot more detail on the glaciers. Most of the glaciers in the Alps are quite closely monitored, and so we've got photographs of their retreat. Whereas many parts of the Himalaya are really not very well studied and have not got long-term records for them. So it's a little bit harder to know what's going on. So I wanted to drop that in because it's a consequence of heat, you see.
Yeah. Do you think you could, therefore, into the future, foresee geopolitical issues? Because reservoirs of water and rivers, they don't know no boundaries. These things created by humans to divide countries up. There could be issues where one country has the resource flowing through it, and then there's less flowing out the other side to another country.
Glenn, it's already happening. Is a prime driver of conflict. This is true in the Middle East. It's true in the relationship between India and Pakistan. It's true in Southeast Asia, where China builds dams that stops water from getting into Vietnam and so on. So, it's that sort of thing is already driving friction between nations, what's happening is that climate change will actually increase that friction. So it kind of destabilizes relationships, or makes the friction worse than it perhaps need be if the climate were, or heaven forbid, cooling.
Indeed. All right, moving right along, a report has come out of the States by the US Environmental Working Group suggesting that lamb, beef and pork generate the most greenhouse gases and use the most fertiliser, water and feed in the production process, and also tend to be higher in fat as well, which is, I suppose, beside the point. But lamb, the worst offender. Now, this is a United States study. Lamb, of course, is a massive export for us here in New Zealand. I think it's now well behind dairy, but it certainly has been a huge exporter for us for decades. Interesting, though, to find out that it has such a huge effect on greenhouse gas emissions. But I don't know, I'm a bit sceptical of how this would apply to other places in the world like New Zealand. What do you think, Gareth?
Yeah, that's pretty much what I was going to say, Glenn. American agricultural systems are often very different to the systems that we have here. I know that their beef meat, for instance, they tend to use feedlot beef, where the cows are fed on grain in sort of what they call feedlots. I don't know if you've ever read Fast Food Nation by what's his name, Eric something or other, which is a fairly graphic description of how they raise meat to make burgers, and it's not a pretty sight.
I think I've seen the documentary, the movie of the same name. Yeah,
that's right. It was made into not a very good film. The book is much better. Anyway, as is often the case. Anyway, in New Zealand we have grass-fed beef, and that has a very different sort of environmental footprint to feedlot beef. Now, I have no idea, and I'm sure we'll get a sheep farmer from the US who will be willing to tell us, but I would guess that they would have a more intensive form of agriculture. Our sheep would tend to be grown on grass like our cows, and tend to be not very intensively farmed. Mainly because we can't farm them that intensively when we're putting them out onto kind of hillside pastures and so on. And a lot of the sheep growing in New Zealand is now done on really quite rugged land. It's not what you would call prime agricultural land necessarily. It's good for sheep, but not necessarily great for anything else.
I suppose it reads like a vegan's manifesto, I suppose, because vegetarians who eat cheese, they can't exactly be off the hook, because cheese, according to the study...
Have you ever tasted vegan cheese?
I have. It's actually not that bad, to be honest. I don't know, you're going to say the opposite,
No, I've tried... I have some great friends who are vegans, and they gave me some vegan cheese once, and it was absolutely disgusting. But then I'm the sort of guy, I go to the cheese shop in Christchurch regularly and buy sort of good cheese. But about the only thing that would stop me being a vegan is their cheese.
I mean, this is an interesting study. It throws off some interesting facts and figures. For example, the article says here that if everyone in the US went meat and dairy free one day of the week for a year, it would have the same effect as taking 7.6 million cars off the road. I don't know for how long, I guess for a year. And eating just one less burger per week, the report says, is equivalent to driving 500 kilometres less.
Yeah, those sort of numbers have been around for a while. I know that a year or two ago, there was a campaign for meat-free Mondays, I think it was called. And I know that Paul McCartney signed up for it, kind of as a in memoriam for his wife, or his first wife, not his second one. So meat-free Mondays, and I think the suggestions were at the time that by giving up meat for one day a week, you could do actually quite a lot in terms of reducing your environmental impact.
I go in meat cycles. I don't know about you, but I eat more meat in the winter.
It's a bit like my cat.
I knew you'd get your cat on the show. I knew it. I knew you were just looking for an in to get the cat on the show.
Absolutely. Well, he's actually at his peak now. It's about 11 kg. So we're talking a serious cat, and he does eat a lot of meat in winter, I have
Yeah,
to say.
yeah.
So maybe perhaps you'll be purring after the show, Glenn.
Maybe. All right, moving right along from cats back into the climate show, diving back in. There's just this interesting story that popped up on my radar today because a lot was talked about by marketers and brand managers and business owners about how during the World Economic Crisis, which essentially really is still carrying on, but from 2008, people decided that being environmental or the word sustainable was no longer the in or done thing. The focus was on tightening the belt and that sort of thing, as opposed to looking after the environment. But just this story today coming out of New Zealand suggests that maybe that's changing somewhat. APN, which owns the biggest daily newspaper in New Zealand called the Herald, is releasing something called Element magazine once a month on a Monday. What they say is, our goal with Element is to design a social marketing brand that will help change people's behaviour, according to the brand manager there. It focuses on sustainability issues, green tech, the green movement, all that kind of stuff. I don't know. Maybe it suggests that that now it's coming a little bit back, and it's a shame that it does fall out of favour for some reason. But it shows that perhaps there's a bit more money sloshing around for green initiatives here in New Zealand, at least. Anyway, I don't know what it's like worldwide.
But let's be blunt about it. If a newspaper is like that, it's because they think they can sell enough advertising to
Yes.
make it work.
Yeah.
It has a bit to do with delivering value to your readers, but ultimately it's about whether they can make money off the supplement,
Yeah.
and they quite clearly think that they can. And that's a good thing, because we don't have to be hair shirt about this. One of the ways to motivate people to do things is by giving them pleasure and by letting them make money and everything else. And so if you can make money and be green and be smart and protect the environment, well, that's got to be a good thing.
Yeah.
It's interesting, there's been quite a lot of in this sort of area happening in New Zealand, particularly with the launch of the Pure Advantage campaign
Yeah.
in the last few weeks. So yeah, it's quite a lot happening in that space, and I think that's a good thing, because just as you and I talk about electric cars possibly being really interesting and perhaps even fun to drive, so can a lot of the solutions that we're looking for, except of course vegan cheese, which you wouldn't force on your worst enemy.
Yeah. Well, I think this is probably a good time to say, Climate Show up for sponsorship. Any of that green money sloshing around, just let you know, sponsorship. But anyway, that's a thumbs up to Element. I'll be keen to see that when it comes out, first issue on the 25th. Staying with media,
I
Gareth,
think that's great.
the BBC has been in focus over the past week.
Yes, indeed. They've done some. They commissioned the BBC Trust, which is the kind of governing body of the BBC, the British Broadcasting Corporation, or as it was once called, the British Broad Corpsing Castration. They commissioned a report from Professor Steve Jones, who's the Emeritus Professor of Genetics at University College London, and they asked him to look at the impartiality and accuracy of BBC science coverage. And he's released a report. Now, my co-blogger, Brian Walker, wrote about this report on Hot Topic last week. And what was particularly interesting for me was that what Jones actually came down to saying is that impartiality is actually built into science, and because it's a competitive process. And so researchers, the objectivity of researchers is judged by the work that they do and by their peers. And so the peer review process in science kind of weeds out the rubbish. And so if you're presenting what amounts to the mainstream of science, then you can expect that you're kind of with where most of the people in that science actually are, or in that subject actually are. And what he was basically saying, and this will feed into the next section of the show, is that it makes no sense to set up a kind of he says, she says dichotomy between mainstream science and a fringe element.
Yeah.
And he talks about climate deniers in terms of, he says, for instance, given the weight of opinion building up around the IPCC, it makes sense for us to focus our coverage on the consensus that climate change is happening and is serious. But he says that climate change deniers have been marginal to the scientific debate, yet they continued to find a place on the airwaves. And so their ability to do so suggests that an over-diligent search for due impartiality or for a controversy or controversy continue to hinder the objective reporting of a scientific story, even when the internal statements of the BBC suggest that no controversy exists. So what's been happening is that kind of the fringe elements have been getting too much credibility because journalists like the idea of running a story and having a bit of conflict and so on. And he's suggesting that perhaps the BBC needs to be a bit more careful about doing that. And to the BBC's credit, their response has been, well, that's, we accept what you're saying, and we're going to make sure that in our journalist training that these issues are raised and people are made aware of how it goes.
Yeah.
And the reason this is important is because when we talk about the skeptics regularly on this show, and we focus with John on what they say about the science, but in fact what the skeptics are doing is they're really slinging mud and hoping that some of it will stick. The scientific arguments that they use, as John so well demonstrates every show, really don't hold much water, but they are given a platform to get it out. Yeah. And so they are able to create an illusion of debate or an illusion of uncertainty where none exists.
Your colleague Brian makes a good point in the article as well up at Hot Topic. He says that broadcasters may not be aware that impartiality checks are actually built into scientific enterprise. So all the hard work around the science, all the debate and everything has already been done through the process of putting out scientific papers, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you publish a paper which is controversial, and people do regularly, and people don't like the results, then you get a toing and froing in the peer-reviewed literature. The argument is fought out on an evidence-based process, and at the end of the day, one side, one argument will win over another, either because the data supports one hypothesis and not another, or because somebody comes up with supporting evidence. Or the proofs are found, and that's the way that science works. But what you don't do is go back and say, well, that bit you studied 20 years ago you got wrong. It's the whole hockey stick thing. They've been nitpicking on the hockey stick for a decade now, but that doesn't change the fact that when you actually do reconstruct paleo temperatures over the last 2,000 years, you find, well, funnily enough, it looks a bit like a hockey stick. However you do the statistics.
Yeah. Well, all of this stuff, Gareth, flows on horribly nicely, terribly nicely, to our next part of the show, where we're going to bring on John at Skeptical Science very shortly, debunking the skeptics. And we're going to mention
it's
that...
a cunning plot. It's a cunning
plot. We're going to mention that name a lot more than I like to be honest, but we will be talking about him, and you'll find out who that is very shortly. But I do need to thank our media partners getting involved with the Climate Show, helping us out, getting us out there. Scoop.co.nz is one of them, putting us up there on the front page just after we come out, which is really, really nice. Also Celsius, CELSIAS.co.nz, also up at idealog.co.nz with the sustainability section there. And Stitcher.com, which is an app you can get on your Android phone, your iPhone, your BlackBerry device, or a few other devices as well. Basically, it's a seamless way of putting a whole bunch of podcasts or radio programs from around the world, stitching it together, and maybe news and commentary or music. In our case, into the science section there, and the environment section, you'll find us, and you'll see us amongst other wonderful programs from like the BBC or the NPR. We're in good company, that's for sure. So check that out at Stitcher.com. Also the links from the show notes up at theclimateshow.com and hot-topic.co.nz.
Yeah, I'd say that I'm on my travels, I'll have my phone with me, and the Stitcher thing is something that I'm looking forward to playing with, because it's, whenever I'm in Wi-Fi contact, I can download some stuff and, really program my own radio station, which has got to be good.
Don't do it. Don't do it with data though. Mobile data. You'll be crucified.
Not a chance. Not a chance. Yeah, my iPhone will. I fell for that one once in Australia, and when I got the phone bill, I nearly died.
Yeah.
In fact, I was nearly decapitated by an outraged partner. But there we are.
Exactly. All right, let's go get John on now.
Okay. Well, this section of the show is Debunking the Skeptic, and I'd like to welcome John Cook from Skeptical Science for this section, as we always do. Welcome, John.
G'day, Gareth. Hey, Graham.
Hey, John.
We're recording at night, which is why John and I look, differently coloured to the way that we normally do. But anyway, so this section of the show is devoted once again to Lord Christopher Monckton. And the reason that we're doing him again, we introduced him on the show a while ago when we talked to John about the Monckton Myths section of the Skeptical Science website. But I wanted to bring him back into the show, much against Glenn's better advice, I suppose, because after he finishes his current tour of Australia, he's going to... I believe he's arriving on something like the 4th of August and will be with us for 3 or 4 days
to New Zealand,
flying off.
Yeah.
Yeah, so he's coming to New Zealand, and the usual suspects, the gang of skeptics, have been desperately trying to find him various venues for debates and getting the exposure on radio and TV and so on. So I thought we'd use this section of the show just to run through some of the things that we know about Lord Christopher Monckton, and then get John to talk to us about some of the key scientific arguments or non-scientific arguments that Monckton is currently using, and why, if he uses them in New Zealand, we'll all know that he's actually just not listening to the people who are telling him that he's wrong. Anyway, the first thing that I'd like to do is just draw attention not to Monckton himself, but to something I read on the internet today. And I have to say that I feel I was as shocked as the next person when I heard about the events in Norway recently. It appears that the mass murderer who shot all those people and blew up those people in Norway left a 1,500-page kind of manifesto on the internet. And I have to say that sections of this document speak very approvingly of what Monckton has had to say about UN attempts to impose a new world order. It references a speech that Monckton gave in Minnesota last year, which actually prompted the very famous debunking of Monckton by John Abraham. So, yeah, I mean, obviously, Monckton had nothing whatsoever to do with events in Norway, but it's just interesting, I think, to note where his ideas and his views seem to find some resonance, and I find that profoundly disturbing. Anyway, let's go and talk about Lord Christopher Monckton, and I intend to rely on this brief introduction on his own curriculum vitae, which is posted at the site of the UK Independence Party, for whom Christopher is, he describes himself as a man of many talents. He's actually their, I think, deputy leader still. He's 58. He's a true polymath with a range of knowledge and interests extending across medicine, finance, journalism, and science. He says that he was talent spotted by Margaret Thatcher and spent 4 years as one of the PM's key advisors. He was such a key advisor that she didn't even mention him when she wrote her biography or her memoirs as time of Prime Minister. It's a fascinating document, is Monckton's CV. He claims to have found a cure for the chronic infection Graves' disease, as well as having invented the hugely popular Sudoku X puzzle. Frankly, I prefer my Sudokus vanilla. He was born 14th of February 1952. He studied at Harrow, which, for those of you who are not British, it is one of the top sort of 2 or 3 upmarket private schools. He went to Churchill College at Cambridge, where he read classics. He took his MA in 1974, which at the same time as he's a couple of years earlier than me. Both of his MA and my MA, I presume, were the usual sorts of you paid a fiver and got them in those days just by living around the university for a wee while. He was chairman of, or he was on the committee of the University Conservative Association, but I think I actually have something in common with him because he ran the Trinity Foot Beagles. And I have a beagle asleep at my feet at the moment. So
well, there you go.
Perhaps
you guys might get on after all, huh?
We might indeed. We may be able to exchange beagle notes at some point. He then went on to University College in Cardiff, where he took a diploma in journalism studies. And I have to say, in the mid-70s, that was one of the best places to go to do a sort of postgraduate diploma in journalism. And he seems to have been quite effective at that. He then went and worked at Yorkshire Post and then to Conservative Central Office. He worked for the Universe, which is a Catholic newspaper. And for anyone who has followed Monckton's writings, you'll know that he's quite a keen Catholic. He's had a few things to say. You could call him a conservative Catholic, I suppose. He worked on the Telegraph Sunday magazine in London. He was managing editor between 1981 and 1982. And then he went to work for Margaret Thatcher's policy unit in 1982-86. And he makes a number of claims about what he did there. I think I would prefer to take those with a pinch of salt, but Margaret didn't mention him. So when he claims to have done modelling of retrovirus transmission to plan for the HIV crisis, budget control, hydrodynamic analysis of warship hull forms, I suspect that he was a user of an Osborne computer, which was one of the very first portable computers of the day, and he probably had a spreadsheet. He then went to work at Today newspaper, then the Evening Standard, and from 1986 until he was consulting editor at the Evening Standard, which is quite a good job, really. And then he's basically gone out on his own and been a consultant of various sorts, designed a couple of puzzles that have been fairly controversial but made a bit of money, got himself involved in climate skepticism, got himself involved with the UK Independence Party, which is to the right of the Conservative Party in Britain, basically wants to get out of Europe. And he also claims to have developed a broad-spectrum cure for infectious diseases at a company he runs called Resurrexy Pharmaceutical. So he claims to have filed patents and that patients have been cured of various infectious diseases, including Graves' disease, multiple sclerosis, influenza, and herpes simplex 6. And he says, our first HIV patient had his viral titer reduced by 38% in 5 days with no side effects. Well, now I think that's fascinating, and I really rather wish that he'd concentrate on his medical career rather than come over here and tell us about climate. Anyway, that is my introduction, and that's the caliber of man that we're going to deal with. He's a journalist, he's a puzzle designer, he's a politician, he is not a climate scientist.
But he could be considered a fantasist. I don't think that you mentioned his house. He claimed to be a member of the House of Lords, a sitting member. Is that right?
He has, on many occasions, referred to himself as a member of the House of Lords, and I believe he sent a letter to President Obama offering fraternal greetings from the Parliament, from Parliament in Britain. Recently, in the last couple of weeks, the Secretary of the House of Lords has issued, never done anything like this before, but it's actually on the the House of Lords website, effectively a letter to Monckton saying, you are not now, nor have you ever been, a member of the House of Lords, and please stop claiming to be or inferring that you are. So he isn't a member of the House of Lords.
Okay, he's not. Okay, all right. Well, it's frustrating.
But I will say, he is a lord. He is definitely Lord Christopher Monckton.
Yeah, and as frustrating a character as he is, going about doing what he's doing, we won't, let the show degenerate into his name calling and all that kind of thing. We will now, with the help of John Cook, because he's so good at this, debunk him where he likes to debate, and that is climate science, even though he's not a climate scientist. And so it's a good.
So what have you picked up on his tour of Australia, John?
Well, it's been a fairly eventful tour. Just before he got over here, there was the whole Ross Garnaut swastika thing, where he compared Garnaut to a fascist and a Nazi, and called Hail Hitler, and there was with a giant swastika on the screen behind him, and the result from that was all the German clubs throughout Australia where he was booked to talk immediately cancelled all of his events. So yeah, it was eventful right from the beginning, before he'd even arrived on our shores. And what happened last week was he had a debate with was it Richard Dennis, I think is his name?
Yeah.
At the National Press Club. And so one thing you can't deny about Monckton is that he's a good debater. He's a very good orator. He's a great public speaker. And so he's always traveling around everywhere, challenging people to debates and saying, why won't people debate me? But what he doesn't seem to realise.
I think that he could be a really great entertainer, and I could find him very entertaining if it wasn't for the fact that he was being so mendacious in terms of his representation of the science, and if the subject wasn't so kind of seriously important to the future of humanity.
Well, the point of a public verbal debate is that someone can say anything they like, but if they say it in a loud and confident enough voice, throw in a few Latin quotes to sprinkle it with some colour, you can be convincing. But the way science works is we publish scientific theories or our evidence in the peer-reviewed literature, which has to get through peer review, has to be screened by experts, and then once it enters the literature, then it's reviewed by others, it's confirmed or refuted. And it's by putting your arguments in writing and getting it published that that people can see whether what you're saying is true or not. So Monckton hasn't published anything in the peer-reviewed literature. He even claims that he has published one article in a physics journal, even though at the very top of that article, the journal itself says this is not a peer-reviewed article. But even while he was here in Australia, Monckton claimed, I've published a peer-reviewed paper, and challenged the journalist who said that he hadn't. So, I guess that's another example of him plumping up his resume. But there's also been a case where a geology professor, Barry Bickmore, has challenged Monckton to a written debate, because if you have to put your words down in writing, then people can check what you're saying to see whether what you're saying is actually accurate or not, whether it matches with the facts. And Monckton, for one reason or another, has refused that debate.
Because he can't add his flowery words and the performance. It's the performance that sells it, right?
Well, what we saw in the Australian debate which is what you see in any Monckton debate, is he just trots out a series of misinformation, and it's literally impossible to refute all of them. And so what I thought I would do now is just pick out a few examples of some of the misinformation that Monckton brought up in the Australian debate, because I'd almost put money on the fact that you would see this same misinformation in the New Zealand, in any talks. Are you telling me debates.
Are you telling me, John, that he's not going to do a new set of PowerPoint slides?
Well, he's been using the same slides for a while now, so yeah, I imagine you'd see the same ones.
And I have to say that it's worth noting also at this point that he loves to cover his slides with a particularly gaudy pink portcullis, which is so clearly and obviously modelled on the House of Lords insignia that they have actually written to him telling him to stop using it. And his response to being told to do this was to change this pink portcullis has chains dangling down the side, and his response was to change from straight chains to wavy chains. So yeah, okay, just thought I'd drop that one in, John. Sorry about that.
Okay, so I'll read out one of the quotes from the debate in Australia, where and this is probably his main scientific argument is about climate sensitivity, which is how much global temperature will change if we double carbon dioxide. And what Monckton said was, why do we actually? Why don't you read this, Gareth?
Yeah, go on, Gareth.
Do us the honor.
Why do we think we're going to suddenly get 3.3 Celsius for a doubling of CO2 concentration when all the science done by measurement and observation rather than by models suggests just 1 Celsius degree?
And this is a common theme, I think, among skeptics. It's not Monckton's own line of argument, where they say that models give us a high climate sensitivity of 3 degrees, but observations give a low sensitivity of 1 degree. But in actuality, a whole line of measurements all point to the same answer of high sensitivity of 3 degrees. Now, I think I might have even brought up this graphic several times on the climate show.
Absolutely.
So
We are familiar with this one.
I apologize for being... I'm being a bit repetitive, but it's because the same myths keep coming up, and you're going to hear this myth throughout Monckton's tour.
That's all right, John. The force is strong in this graphic.
It's a clear example of a zombie fact, isn't it? They love to claim a zombie argument. They love to claim that that climate sensitivity is not 3 degrees, and they ignore all of the evidence repeatedly.
Yeah. So having another look at this graph, what we see is a number of different ways of estimating climate sensitivity. So we look at the instrumental record, we're looking at over the last 1,000 years, looking over the climate response to volcanic eruptions, and looking over millions of years throughout Earth's history. And consistently we get that same answer, that of 3 degrees climate sensitivity, which is positive feedback amplifying the warming from CO2. So it's not just models, it's a whole range of measurements and observations all providing a consistent answer. And what Monckton does is just take the one study, the one analysis by Richard Lindzen that uses satellite data to find low sensitivity, which is a study that has been refuted in the peer-reviewed literature, and he hangs on to that
many times.
So, and then, if you want to dig deeper into that issue, there is a short URL too for the sensitivity, climate sensitivity references.
There is. Go on, Gareth.
You want me to do that again? It's http://skst.to/SCNSITIVITY sensitivity, chaps.
So the next quote. Now, I was watching this debate live, and I think this is a good example of how tricky it is when you're in a live verbal debate. If you layer in all this misinformation, it's impossible to keep track of it all and to refute it all. So let me read this quote. Oh no, let Gareth read this quote to us, and then we'll dig into it.
God, I'm having to work for my money tonight. What money? He said. If we go back to 1750, using the Central England temperature record as a proxy for global temperatures, we've had 0.9 degrees Celsius of warming in response to an addition of greenhouse gases to atmosphere by us, which is almost equivalent to a doubling of CO2 concentration. That's going to give you around 1 degree Celsius of warming per doubling of CO2 concentration.
So basically what Monckton is saying here is we've had about 1 degree warming over the last 100 or 200 years, and CO2 plus the other greenhouse gases, methane and CFCs, etc., that they're around equivalent to a doubling of CO2. So we've only had 1 degree warming for a doubling of CO2. So he's saying, well, there's your evidence that climate sensitivity is low. Now, when I was listening to this, I got stuck at that first part where he said using the Central England temperature record as a proxy for global temperature. And I thought, well, hang on, you can't use a single location to tell you what's happening for global temperature.
Yeah.
Don't worry, John. I got stuck at exactly the same point.
But that was not the main error in this argument, because we have had about 0.8, 0.9 degrees warming over the last century. So that's not too bad. But what he has omitted here is that while we've had approximately a doubling of CO2 equivalent, or like we've had warming from all the different greenhouse gases, we've also had a cooling effect from aerosols. So while there's a big warming effect, there's also that's been cancelled out partly by aerosols. And then there's another important fact, is that our climate has inertia. So let me explain, just show you this graph here, which shows up the top of the figure here, we've got the warming effect. CO2 is the top one, methane and the other greenhouse gases are the next one down. But then going down to those blue boxes pointing towards the left, that's the cooling effect you get from aerosols, which are just little particles suspended in the atmosphere that reflect sunlight and stop sunlight from reaching the surface and warming the Earth. So, and the other thing Monckton isn't factoring in his calculations here is that climate has inertia. It doesn't warm up instantly. When you turn a kettle on, it doesn't boil straight away. It takes a while for the water to warm up. And similarly, our planet now, while it's building up heat, the oceans take a while to warm up. So you need to factor in the cooling effect from aerosols and climate inertia to work out climate sensitivity. And Monckton ignores both of those.
Actually, talking about this subject, if I could liken this to making beer. I've got a fermenter on the go at home at the moment. Right now, it's very cold outside, so that coldness sort of creeps into the house. But if I turn on the heater, it warms up that room, right? And then that heat that's in the room slowly gets into from the walls of the fermenter and keeps that at a certain temperature. But by the same token, if I turn off the heater, that very slowly affects the fermenter, and that slowly cools down. It cools down a lot slower than the rest of the room. Tell me if I'm going well off track here. But also, right, you get it up to a certain temperature that the yeast is really happy, right? And the yeast starts going, and then the yeast creates its own heat inside the fermenter, and then warms it up even further than, say, what the rest of the room is. Does this relate to anything we're talking about? Well, I think it does. It's runaway climate change. The yeast has runaway climate change.
I have to say, John, he's just jealous because I'm sitting here with a glass of wine, and he went to look at the studio fridge and there was no beer. So, but yes, Glenn, you are quite right, because a large mass of liquid, such as the mash in your fermenter, it's got thermal inertia, if you like. It takes a while to heat up and it takes a while to cool down. So, yeah.
Well, there's a Nobel Prize winner, Ernest Rutherford, who says if you can't explain your science to a barmaid, then you don't understand. So we probably need to get more of our climate down to beer metaphors, I think.
Exactly. That's what I'm trying to say here.
A very fine New Zealander one, I have to say, Ernest Rutherford.
Okay, sorry to interrupt that. All right. So we're at inertia. Would you want the short code for that, do we?
Yes, http://sks.to/inertia.
So the next quote, and this is quite instructive too, and I think this will probably help you guys as well to be aware of just one of Monckton's serial habits, and that's well, Gareth, if you want to read the quote, and then we'll have a look at it.
he's in this quote, he refers to the Royal Society, and what he's talking about, of course, is the Royal Society in Britain, which is the world's oldest and probably most prestigious scientific organisation. The Royal Society, in a complete rewrite of its originally disastrously unscientific statement about the climate, now says we do not know how much the planet will warm as a result of our activities.
And what this is a complete misrepresentation of what the Royal Society is saying in their report. And there's a link to it. Like this report's available on the website on the web. So if you guys could provide a link to it in your notes,
I'm sure we will.
And what the Royal Society say is that there's a wide consensus, but continuing discussion that a doubling of CO2 will cause between 2 to 4.5 degrees warming. So, which is completely consistent with what the IPCC is saying. Monckton somehow gets from that we don't know how much warming the planet will warm as a result of CO2. So I'm not sure how he goes from what the Royal Society is saying to his statement. But what you do find when you look through Monckton's history is that he has a consistent habit of misrepresenting scientists. He quotes sources, but then when you go and ask the scientists who he's quoted, they'll say that's not what I was saying, or I was actually saying the opposite, or my research has been misrepresented by Monckton.
Absolutely, and the key point, of course, John, is that he is doing this in the context of a basically stage show, a live performance, where it's impossible for anyone debating him. Even, I mean, you and I could sit in a Monckton debate and probably, with a bingo card, tick off all the sort of standard arguments that he's using and know full well that each one of those is a misrepresentation or an argument from somewhere, from some posterior orifice somewhere. But the average member of the general public, the average viewer, isn't going to get that. Of course, his audience tends to be primarily climate skeptics, and they love it. They lap it up because he's telling them what they want to hear. His performance is reinforcing their prejudices. And in that respect, he's a kind of warm-up man for the climate skeptics, probably more so than he is an influencer of debate. Because one of the key things I wanted to say about Monckton in this show was that he's British establishment. When we looked at his curriculum vitae, we saw that he went to top public schools. He went to Cambridge University. He did well, and he got himself into the core of the British Conservative Party. But when you look at him today, he's actually a real fringe figure. He's way outside the mainstream of British politics. Britain has its own kind of, inverted commas, respectable climate skeptics group, the Global Warming Policy Foundation. And I can't find any affiliation between Monckton and that group. I think that speaks volumes for how Monckton is regarded in his own home country. They don't take him seriously. They find him to be a bit of a clown.
Yeah, and but isn't also the real problem? I mean, he could say all this stuff. You know, he could have his own online internet show about it, perhaps. But in many respects, that would be, you know, a tree falling in a forest, right? But so the real problem here is that when he comes to countries like Australia and New Zealand is the oxygen that he's given by the media, and especially I'm predicting here in New Zealand there will be certain shows, certain high profile TV shows that might see him as a fun sideshow and give his opinions some voice.
I'm afraid that that's probably what will happen, that he is a high profile figure, certainly media friendly. He gives good interviews. He's outrageous. He's said outrageous things. He's been in the news because of the Gano Nazis thing. I've no doubt that he will get some exposure in the media when he gets here. I don't think he will contribute anything to the debate because I don't think that anybody who has ever studied the subject or anyone who's ever tried to design policy related to climate change will take him in the least bit seriously. And it's a mystery to me, actually. It's a complete mystery to me why Australia, or at least, sorry, John, a section of the Australian population who are not noted for loving, members of the British aristocracy, and yet they seem to fawn over him. It's a complete mystery, and the same is true in the US too. I mean, normally they like to sneer at the Poms and the British, the upstairs downstairs accents and everything else, but somehow Monckton comes across.
It's a mystery. He's got something. He's got the X factor that we don't obviously have.
I guess if he's saying things that a certain part of the population want to hear, then they're willing to overlook some of the more annoying aspects of his personality and just enjoy those themes.
Yeah.
But
well, that would be right. It would be interesting in a way to contrast. I mean, I don't wish to be controversial, but who could be the equivalent figure on the side of action? Well, obviously Al Gore. Because Al wants to see us do something and he's prepared to put himself out there and promote the subject. In Australian terms, maybe Tim Flannery. But the big difference between Monckton and Flannery or Gore is that Monckton, as John's so ably demonstrated in the last 20 minutes, relies on distortions and misrepresentations, whereas you can look at the works of Gore and Flannery and see that, with one or two exceptions, they're basically reporting what mainstream science says. Would you think that's fair, John?
Yeah, I'd say that's a fair comment. I mean, Tim Flannery has made a few statements that were, I guess, I probably would have said them a little differently to how he answered the questions, but yeah, they've had a commitment to accuracy. Where Monckton is a complete contrast, because he just has a series of misinformation, and when it's pointed out that it's all wrong, he just continues to say them anyway, brazenly. And
yes, absolutely.
While he was in Australia, he would say, "Name one example of me misrepresenting a scientist," and so if he does bring up that question, if he does ask that in New Zealand, what I've done is drawn up a whole list of examples.
Huh.
Oh, wonderful.
So I've got a short URL there, the Monckton sources link, if you want to give that, so that.
Oh yes, absolutely.
Use that as a resource.
I think this will be compulsory reading for the every member of the media in New Zealand. It's http://sks.to/ Monckton Sources. That's MONCKTONSOURCES.
And credit for that should go to John Abraham too, because he's the one who looked through all of Monckton's statements in his various talks, and some of them were quite extraordinary statements quoting scientists. So he thought, well, did the scientists really say that? And he went to the trouble, spent an incredible amount of time actually contacting all of these scientists, finding out whether Monckton had represented them correctly, and then collected all these direct quotes from all the scientists.
Absolutely, and we did a little something to support John at the time, because Monckton threatened to sue him. Didn't happen. Monckton has threatened to sue all sorts of people over the years, which never seems to have happened. No doubt he'll threaten to sue us too, John. That'll be exciting, won't it? But anyway, I wanted to note just one thing, and that is that he has a paucity of sort of disparaging phrases. He described John Abraham as looking a bit like a raw prawn, I think, or a cooked prawn even. But he seems to have applied that also to the chairman of the ABC in Australia as well.
Yeah, something about a small shrimp or something like that.
What is it with British peers and crustacea?
I'm not sure. When the whole overcooked prawn thing came out, and then that incident was referred to as Prawngate, and I think I mentioned that on my website about Prawngate, and someone said, Well, that's not very nice, making fun of Monckton's appearance like that, and because of the way his eyes, I guess, have a bit of a prawn-like appearance. But what I pointed out that this was actually Monckton labeling John as that.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
So maybe the continued use of that insult is a bit of projection.
Monckton obviously hasn't seen District 9 and the aliens in District 9. Those look like prawns. They actually look like prawns. Anyway.
Well, that's enough yabbing about yabbies from us lot. So, John, thank you very much for that. You'll probably be aware that I'm disappearing for a couple of months. I'm hoping that you'll agree to continue to appear from time to time with young Glenn and keep the old climate show flag flying for a while. I'm disappearing off to Europe. I'm using up a lifetime's supply of carbon credits in order to get myself there. So I will be back at the end of September and raring to go. And if I can drop any small items in from overseas, I'll do so. But I'm very much hoping that you'll continue to hold Glenn's hand. You know, he needs someone to bounce off.
Yeah, indeed. Big time. Yeah, that'd be nice. That'd be nice, John. We'll hook up in the next few weeks or so. But for that,
and say hello to Wendy for us too.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. When they say hello.
Yes, that has been John Cook. Thanks, John.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
So now we're into the final leg of the show. We call it the solutions segment. It's examples of green tech, research solutions, all that kind of stuff. And first up, we're looking at a local New Zealand story. I saw this one on idealog.co.nz. A Marlborough wine producer has slashed its annual heating bill by choosing to burn its own vine prunings to produce heat. It's Yealand's estate, and they've replaced their LPG-fired boiler with 2 wood-burning boilers to produce the heat that it needs for winemaking. And they've got some financial support from the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Authority. Based on the 2011 harvest, Yealand's says LPG consumption has dropped by more than 46,000 kilowatt hours. 466,000 kilowatt hours, resulting in a saving of $168,000 in just 1 year. That's quite cool. Replace the LPG, yes. which pumps out a whole lot of greenhouse gases.
Yeah, it's very cool. I say this as someone who's got a small vineyard. In fact, if Glenn edits this in a way that shows the wine I've been sipping tonight, I've been drinking my own wine whilst talking, which is probably could explain a lot.
Have you got the bottle there? I'd like to see the label. Is it around or not?
Oh no, I haven't got the bottle with me. I'm sorry. I just had the glass. No, any vineyard will tell you that at this time of year, which is for those northern hemispherically challenged people, is winter down here. This week I shall be out there commencing pruning in the vineyard, and we burn our prunings. And you have to do this because it gets rid of disease pressure and all sorts of things. Actually, also bundles of vine prunings are excellent in barbecues. They give barbecued meats a very nice flavour.
Yeah, right.
So they do indeed.
But
and
it says though, this is what puzzles me. It says burning the prunings is carbon neutral. How is that?
Oh, that's because when I finish pruning my grapes, which will happen while I'm away because the winemaker I work with is going to take over for me. But what will happen is that we'll start off with these bare vines, and around about October time they'll start budding, and they will grow and they will put on a whole canopy over the summer, and all of the carbon in that canopy will be fixed out of the atmosphere. And so when we come next year to do the pruning and burning it off, basically we're recycling the carbon that the plants have fixed during the year. So it's an annual cycle when you burn vine prunings, and it's completely carbon neutral.
Okay.
It's a similar principle when you heat your house, as we do, with logs. So at the moment, this winter, we're burning a lot of blue gum from a big old tree that was hanging over our bedroom and was threatening to sort of collapse on us in the night. So we had had to take this wonderful old tree down. And that will provide us with about 2 winters worth of fuel. And what we're doing is returning to the atmosphere carbon that tree fixed over probably 80 or 90 years. So it's carbon neutral, but on a much longer time scale.
Okay, all right, that makes a lot of sense. Go burn your vine prunings if you've got a vineyard, if you're lucky enough to have a vineyard. Apparently 161 tons of CO2 that they will cut a year, and by doing that.
You have to remember that Yealand's estate is actually very large.
Yeah.
So we're talking about a huge vineyard there, or lots of vineyards scattered over Marlborough and Canterbury and so on. So you're talking about a very large operation in order to be able to get that scale of saving. It would be 2/5 of Fanny Adams, as my mum would say, for me to do that.
All right, well, we're on to electric cars, our favourite part of the solutions section. First up, this new car, surprisingly coming out of India. They're calling it the Tata Nano electric car, and it's tiny. I thought that, I guess, this shows what little I know about sort of the industry in India, but I thought most of what they produce is like old moulds, from old car types and old scooters, brand new cars, but using old moulds. But this one looks like it just comes straight out of Japan.
Yeah, well, the Nano was announced originally as this was the cheap car for the Indian masses, and was, if I'm recalling correctly, combustion engine job, very small engine, designed for city transport. And, it looks a bit like one of those kind of hyper expensive Mercedes mini city car things.
Yeah.
And the fact that they've gone for an electric car version makes a lot of sense, because they don't want to have a big engine stuck away. They just want something they can put the motors in the wheels, stick some batteries on the bottom, and they can get around. They're not looking for huge long range. They're not trying to provide Rolls-Royce comfort levels. It's a solution for the masses. And I think India recognizes, just as China does, that there are limits to the amount of liquid fossil fuels that are going to be available if they are going to provide mobility for a large part of their population. They ain't going to be able to do it by giving everybody a Jeep or a Land Rover or whatever. They're going to have to look to solutions like this.
It promises a driving range of 160 kilometres on one charge, which is far more than, I guess, what the average commuter would do in a day anyway. And it runs on polymer lithium-ion batteries, which is said to be more powerful and smaller as well.
It makes a huge amount of sense for this sort of vehicle. And I do think that we get hung up on electric vehicle ranges too much, because for most people, what have I've been into Christchurch today from the farm. It's about 65k each direction. So a car that had 130k range would be just perfect for me, because it would be sitting outside getting charged up at the moment, or possibly I could have parked it in town and charged up while I was there. The number of occasions, my little Peugeot diesel has a range on a full tank of diesel of probably 750 kilometres or so.
Yeah.
But there aren't very many days when I drive 750 kilometres,
And staying with electric vehicles, a story about 7 electric vehicles that are over 100 years old. This doesn't sound right, Gareth.
Well, absolutely. It just something I stumbled on recently, and it reminded me of something that I once knew and had forgotten, and that was that if you go back 100 years ago, back to the 1890s and the early 1900s, actually it wasn't at all clear that the internal combustion engine was going to win out over electric vehicles. There were quite a wide variety of electric cars being made. So you've got an 1891 Morrison, and this article at Yahoo Green includes photographs of these things. They're wonderful. The Morrison had a top speed of about 20 miles per hour. It looks like a sort of carriage that should be should have horses in front of it.
Yeah.
But that's fine.
Yeah.
Had a range of 50 miles. And then there's a little bit lower down, we've got the Riker torpedo. That got to 57 miles per hour in 1901. It was the fastest car on the road. Huh. And then there was an electric bus, a Studebaker, and a Krieger from 1906 with just a wonderful. I'd love to have a car like that with two people up front driving it for me. That would be fantastic.
I could see you swanning around North Canterbury in one of those.
Seriously.
Yeah.
I absolutely. I could love that. But these were serious vehicles of their day. They were probably fairly expensive because all cars were at the time, and they fulfilled the needs of people who wanted horseless carriages, as they were called at the time. And I just thought this was interesting because very soon after that, the fossil fuels won out. And we entered a period with Ford and so on, and Mercedes with the petrol engine, and that saw us right the way through 100 years. And now we're at the kind of other end of that stage and having to look at electric vehicles again. And that is my cue to get on and talk about the next item in the solutions section, which is a new documentary called Revenge of the Electric Car. And some of our listeners and viewers may remember a 2006 documentary called Who Killed the Electric Car?
I do, indeed. It was
and that was a documentary that was made. Yeah, absolutely. And it was looking at why in the 1990s electric cars that were being developed were killed off by the car companies, and it was to do with petrol prices and everything else, and General Motors had a sort of management implosion and everything else. So yeah, it was a bit of a problem for the first electric vehicles that General Motors developed, one was called the EV1, and so we've now come on sort of 20 years on, and we're at the stage where EM is winning awards for its electric car, the Volt. And so this guy, Chris Payne, who Killed the Electric Car, has made another documentary called Revenge of the Electric Car. And I think it's going to be a very interesting one to watch. The Guardian article makes it sound like a very interesting film for anyone who, like Glenn and I, talk about these things without ever actually driving them.
Yeah, and Gareth, you won't be able to hear it, but we'll just get a little bit of the audio from the trailer. Yeah.
Give us the cars that we want.
Okay.
I got the flood of emails saying, you sold out to the oil companies and you've killed my grandchildren. I hope you rot in hell.
They have based their whole company strategy on it. If it fails, there might not be a Nissan.
You need to predict the future.
Oh, I'm really looking forward to this. Hopefully it'll make its way down to this part of the world soon after release. Anyway.
Absolutely. No, at the very least, I'm sure there'll be a streaming option for technically savvy people like us, Glenn.
No doubt. We've got more electric car stuff. A story from The Independent as well.
Yeah, it's not electric cars, but it is electrics, and it's about a Japanese company called NEC, who are one of the enormous Japanese conglomerates, and they've launched a household energy storage system. So basically, it's a place where every building can store power, which can then be used at times when the electricity grid or the solar panels or whatever you've got on your house are not providing power.
Huh.
And they've made the first 100 units of what they call their household energy storage system, and it's going to be made available to, or it was made available to construction companies in Japan from July the 18th.
Cool.
So the system automatically controls power to the building by connecting to the distribution panel and enabling interactive coordination with the power supplied by a commercial energy company and the home's electrical devices, its solar power systems and other equipment. So it can store power during the night when there's periods of low power consumption, and then use that during the day. So that during peak periods in hot weather, like a heat wave or something, the building can run off the batteries without having to place a big strain on the grid. So it's an important it's an important development in terms of smoothing out loads on grids, and it helps to make it smooths out peak loads, which means that if enough people are doing this, you probably won't need to have grids that are able to respond to that sudden everybody deciding to make a cup of tea halfway through Coronation Street.
Yeah, and I guess that solves. I mean, it gives you another option, right? Because if you generate electricity at home, you have the option of selling that back to the grid if you generate a surplus. But this is another option to be able to store it on site, so that at night time or on days where there's no wind or no sunshine or whatever you're using, to be able to use that stored power. This is brilliant. This is what we've been waiting for.
Oh, well, absolutely. And it's actually, people have talked about using electric vehicles in the same way, because if you've got an electric vehicle with a large battery parked out by the side of the house, if that's plugged into your system, then it can provide power storage, not just for your house, but actually for the grid as a whole. So apart from being able to charge it up to give yourself range when you get in the vehicle, it can become an integral part of the power management, if you like, of a domestic system, but also for the grid as a whole. So it's interesting that NEC are doing this. I'm sure we'll hear more about it as time goes by, but it's just another one of those kind of little bits of the jigsaw that are beginning to fall into place.
Brilliant. Well, as always, of course, all the links to all the stories we've been talking about you'll find up at theclimateshow.com and hot-topic.co.nz, where you'll find the show in a few flavours, video and audio, and all the links to the various places you can download or watch that as well. And of course to our social sites, twitter.com/The Climate Show and facebook.com/The Climate Show, or my personal one, twitter.com/Radio Whammo, and Gareth at twitter.com/Hot Topic NZ. Yes, Hot Topic NZ, that's right.
That's one. And of course, Glenn and I are both on Google+. So feel free to share with us, or to put us into your own circles. And I have to say that a couple of parts of this show have been done using a Hangout at Google+. So we're really pushing boundaries, aren't we, Glenn?
We've been across Skype and Hangout, and we'll see what's going to work best into the future. But you will be departing next week, so this is your last one before you go away. I hope you have a wonderful time, and you put some of the world's cares aside for a little bit, and just let your hair down. Can you do let your hair down?
Well, I hope to. No, I haven't got enough hair to let down. In fact, it's going to get even shorter very soon because I'm going into summer mode.
Yeah.
But I do hope to get up close and personal with an alpine glacier, and close to see how the River Rhone is doing, because I should be cycling around vineyards and troufiers in the Rhone Valley, which will be quite exciting. I'm looking forward to that.
We'll make sure you take the old video camera with some good audio with you, and we'll see if we can't include some of it on the show.
Oh, I'm not sure about that. Oh. Have you ever seen me in shorts? No.
Oh, excellent. Well, we hope to catch up on the road anyway, and we wish you all the best, and definitely see you in 2 months' time. And in the meantime, I will be cranking out shows left, right, and centre. It's going daily. Oh, well, I don't know. We'll see what happens.
I can't think of anyone better to do it, Glenn. Thanks, mate, and we'll see you soon. Cheers.
See ya.
What good is a drop in the ocean? What good is a drop in the